Hello, everybody. Do come in and sit at the front. We'll pretend it's a press conference. And don't be shy. Ask your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll have opportunities to discuss later. Uh, our guest today, a very timely one, because today is the day that officially UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency, has been given its marching orders by the Israeli government. And this has profound implications, as Lex was saying, is because we have Israel ordering a UN agency to quit and people in the UN, in the Israeli government, threatening to take over the premises in defiance of the Vienna Convention, international law, common sense, justice, and God knows what else, and numerous UN resolutions. And you can see how serious it was because last week the Security Council, I believe, was 14 votes to 1 on this issue against Israel. The one being, would you believe, the US. And here we have to be bipartisan because Trump is nowhere sort of better, as far as we can see, than Joe Biden on this issue. But this, it's flagrant disavowal of UN law, international law, and it has profound implications in two different ways. One, as Lex will explain, is for the welfare of the Palestinians who are being cut off from the lifeline that's kept them alive for so many decades and through so many recent years of war and travail, and also for international law, because this is flagrant defiance. And the implication from some of the Israeli politicians is that the UN premises being vacated will be taken and used for illegal settlements in East Jerusalem, which, as you might remember, by international law and accepted by everyone except the US and Israel, is occupied territory. So we are in multiple breaches of international law. The implications are profound and disturbing. And one of the questions is whether anything can be done and whether Guterres should have done it and will do it. So Lex is in Austria at the moment. Lex worked for UNRWA for many years. He's with the Dutch Refugee Council and was profoundly, I was going to say implicated, but involved in the international law aspects of UNRWA's existence, because this has been a continuous legal guerrilla struggle between the Israelis and the and UNRWA. And I've been covering this for 30 years as well. When it started, the Israelis actually appreciated the fact that UNRWA was providing for services which, under the Geneva Conventions, Israel, as the occupying power, should have been paying for. So the international community was paying for the education, healthcare, and other administrative functions that the occupying power should have been paying for. But little gratitude there for the subsidy towards the Israeli occupation. Lex, perhaps you can elaborate on this and say where we are today with the, as far as we know, there's been no incursion by Israeli security forces into the UN compound, has there?
Thank you very much, Ian, and I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. Indeed, a dark day also for me personally, as you mentioned, I worked for half my lifetime, over 3 decades, with UNRWA in and around Palestine, and the Jerusalem headquarters was indeed my first workplace, and is also a workplace that I continued coming back to up till the very end of my tenure with the agency. So I was really the last couple of days feeling pain for what's happening. Now, let me in my sort of introductory comment, and then I'm very happy to take questions. Let me briefly talk about what the ban is exactly about, what the two laws that the Knesset adopted on 30 October of last year, what they entail. What are the immediate implications as of today? This was the ban kicking in. When the laws were adopted, there was a a sort of a grace period of 90 days stipulated, which ended yesterday. So that's why today we are the first day that the ban is effective. And then what are the longer term applications? What can we expect in the weeks and months to come? Now, just to remind you, UNRWA is a huge humanitarian organization. It's a sister agency of UNHCR. They're the two refugee agencies of the UN system. And UNRWA was created at the same time of UNHCR to provide specific support to the Palestinian refugees, the refugees from the war in 48, 49. And UNRWA has primarily done that by providing education, basic education, primary healthcare services, social services, infrastructure support, and microfinance services. In addition to whenever there is renewed upheaval and even war in the areas where UNRWA works, emergency services like today in Gaza, like during the civil war in Lebanon, like during the war in Syria, etc. So it's a huge organization which, contrary to UNHCR, that works through implementing partners, UNRWA directly implements services with its own teachers, doctors, nurses, social workers, etc. So that's why it has a total workforce of about 30,000 in the 5 areas where it operates, Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. 30,000 staff, 99.9% local Palestinian staff, only a couple of hundred international expatriate UN employees, UNRWA employees. So it has been in place for 75 years, providing these basic services. Out of the 30,000, 17,000 are in between Gaza and the West Bank, 13,000 in Gaza alone, and 4,000 in the West Bank. So that's just a quick note of background about UNRWA. Now, after many years of sort of criticizing the agency and attacking the agency for either staff being sort of anti-Semitic or engagement in perceived terrorist activities, this culminated in the Israeli Knesset on 30 October adopting 2 laws on UNRWA. The first one prohibiting UNRWA from operating in sovereign territory of Israel. And according to Israel, the sovereign territory where UNRWA operates is that part of the West Bank that includes East Jerusalem, according to Israel's definition of Greater Jerusalem, the definition of Jerusalem that Israel adopted when unilaterally it annexed East Jerusalem in the 1980s to become part of sovereign Israeli territory, in violation of international law. So Israel has, effective today, UNRWA is prohibited from operating in East Jerusalem as defined by Israel, which is the parts of East Jerusalem in the city, but it's also on the other side of the barrier, some of the refugee camps in the West Bank, Shufat and Kalandia, that are within the perimeters of Greater Jerusalem as defined by Israel. So that's a prohibition, a full prohibition. And then with respect to, on top of that, a second law was adopted that is stipulated that there should be no contact by any part of the Israeli government with UNRWA as of today. And that extends also to those parts of the occupied Palestinian territory, the remainder of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, where UNRWA is not prohibited. So we have two levels of ban, a full ban which says UNRWA should not operate inside East Jerusalem, as I mentioned, and an instruction for Israeli officials not to engage with UNRWA in the rest of the OPT. Now, what does this mean in practice as of today? You have seen, for those of you who follow the news, you have seen images whereby Israeli demonstrators, including settlers, are sort of planting flags at the UNRWA headquarters building in East Jerusalem, which is actually its West Bank field office compound. And it's a big office complex. You should see it as a small university compound. It's 8.4 acres in size. And UNRWA, knowing that its staff would be prohibited from operating and also having a duty of care towards both its international and its local staff, has sort of effectively vacated that premise and removed as much of its movable assets to other UNRWA offices in the West Bank and to Amman. The international staff that were operating there, who saw their visa expire yesterday, have been relocated to Amman, to the UNRWA offices in Amman, from which they will continue to sort of remotely manage their operation. And the local UNRWA staff in East Jerusalem, living on the Israeli side of the wall around Jerusalem, the barrier, have been told sort of to wait further developments from home. So that's why you see, Israeli demonstrators around those premises. The Israeli municipality has been, and property developers have been having their eye on those premises for many, many years, because it's in a part of East Jerusalem that is bordering an Orthodox neighborhood in West Jerusalem, and the municipality has announced that it will use this prime piece of land to construct further Orthodox housing, which would effectively amount to another Jewish colony in occupied East Jerusalem. Because even though it is adjacent to West Jerusalem, it is occupied land.
So, what is the? Are there currently any UN staff on these premises?
No, my understanding is, I don't know whether there's any security personnel left of the UN, but my understanding is that that staff have withdrawn. They've locked up the building. There are CCTVs, cameras monitoring the situation. It's also clear that even though there is a ban under Israeli national law, under the UN Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations, these premises are inviolable. They are, subject to continued privileges and immunity.
Like an embassy, yeah.
Like an embassy. So they cannot be seized sort of automatically. So the question is very much what will happen. Is Israel going to legally start eviction procedures? But then there is also the ban. In one of the Israeli media reports of yesterday, it was highlighted that it's a bit of an anomaly, because if Israel starts eviction procedures, it has to engage with the agency. But the Knesset ban said they should not engage with the agency after today, from today onwards.
So they're not even allowed to tell them to get out.
It's a bizarre situation on many fronts. So that's the situation. But UNRWA is much more. Let's not just focus on that premise. UNRWA is much more. So what happens with UNRWA's operations? Well, there are a number of schools and health centers in East Jerusalem. again, within the perimeters of the wall, staff have been told to go home. So the schools are closed, the clinics are closed. So as of today, Palestinian refugees in East Jerusalem are missing out on critical services. On the other side of the barrier, UNRWA, and both in the rest of the West Bank and in the other parts of what Israel considers Greater Jerusalem, UNRWA, because UNRWA there is not prohibited, UNRWA has told its staff to continue operations as usual, as also the Secretary General, the UN Secretary General has instructed. And we will see what will happen in the weeks and in the days and weeks to come.
Well, this
In
is where
Gaza,
can we stick there on the Secretary General? I mean, I can understand there's a sort of caution not to provoke the Israelis, so or put truth in the rumors. So he's been careful not to do visible preparations that might be seen as a provocation, but it's quite clear who's doing the provoking here. And so what is he? Have there been any practical countermeasures? I'm not suggesting they should booby trap and mine the premises for the IDF when they come in, although it must be a temptation. But what what practically can he do to frustrate and to assert international law in the face of Israeli outrage?
well, the policy of the Secretary General since the ban was adopted at the end of October has been the ban is illegal. UNRWA cannot be replaced. UNRWA is irreplaceable. And as a result of both, we will not engage in contingency planning, and UNRWA is there to stay and deliver. That has, in a nutshell, been the policy, which on the one hand, making this point of principle is very important. And Norway has taken the ban to the International Court of Justice to request a further advisory opinion complementary to the one that was rendered in July of last year. Adala, Israeli human rights organization, has taken the matter to the Israeli High Court, made a petition which was turned down last night. So it's and then the Secretary General has referred the matter to the General Assembly and to the Security Council. So that's fine, but not engaging in any serious planning for the day after, I believe, has been and continues to be very risky, and now also risks effectively giving up on this prime real estate in Jerusalem. Other UN agencies are renting premises in East Jerusalem for hundreds of thousands of dollars per agency per year. Whereas here we have a UN campus that has 4 warehouses, including cold storage, including 6 office buildings, car repair workshops, a petrol station, parking space, perimeter fences that meet the UN DSS security standards that are available to the UN free of charge. And if there had been proper contingency planning, the UN could have decided to turn this into UN common premises. Now, with the ceasefire in Gaza, being able to serve as a hub to support stepping up the humanitarian response to the ceasefire, that opportunity has been missed. The Secretary General could still do it, but it's very late, and indeed it's one of the aspects that has sort of
So
risk.
he could invite the World Food Program to use the premises, for example.
Exactly. And he could, the UN has over the past decade, since the turn of the century, in many countries in the world, it has UN common premises, a UN house, where different UN agencies share facilities for the sake of economy, for the sake of facilitating security, etc. this could have been done with respect to this compound.
But the world, I mean, one of the crucial things that the Americans have been doing is pressuring agencies like the World Food Program, which they actually set up, as I remember, to countermand the fact that the other people were controlling the Food and Agricultural Organization. But they set up the WFP to act as their agent, and now they're trying to get the WFP to take over the functions of UNRWA.
Parts of
Beforehand.
UNRWA's functions, just the emergency relief side, but that's true. There could have been a very good case made for the other UN agencies. There's also WHO WHO is as we speak looking for cold storage facilities and warehousing facilities in East Jerusalem, and here we have, a fantastic compound, fully equipped that is let go. But let me also, if you allow me, turn to Gaza, which is critical, and I can imagine your listeners are interested. Well, in Gaza, again, because UNRWA is not strictly prohibited there, UNRWA has decided to keep a small contingent of international staff inside Gaza. I understand there are up to 9 internationals who continue to work from there to supervise the 13,000 local staff that are there. And the local staff have also been told to continue operating. And they work very closely together with UNRWA and the other agencies. And in Gaza, the UNRWA setup with its warehouses, its trained staff that have the trust of the community, with its distribution center, with its vehicle park, with its offices, etc. They have been the backbone, not just of their own operation, but also facilitating the work of WHO with the polio vaccinations, the work of World Food Program that do not have their own infrastructure inside the Gaza Strip. They're bringing food to the border. Now, UNRWA is not strictly prohibited there, but this no contact policy means that visa for staff, international staff, are not being renewed. Vehicles cannot be registered. Imports are prohibited because they require cooperation with Israel, and not just food commodities, but everything else that a humanitarian operation needs, including fuel and what you have.
Well,
Deconfliction.
cash is one of the important things. And
Cash is one. Payment of salaries for the 17,000 employees in the OPT. And in the media reports of the last 2 days by Israeli media, the government representatives have said, to Israeli banks that act as the conduit between the banks in New York, where UNRWA's funds sit, and the Bank of Palestine, through which UNRWA actually pays its salaries, are they also affected by the ban? And Israeli officials could not answer that question. So we don't know whether UNRWA is in a position to pay its salary, and if it tells its staff to continue to operate but cannot pay them, of course, that can last for a couple of weeks. It can last potentially for a few months, but it cannot last, indefinitely. So these are all things.
The Bank of Palestine is registered in Jordan, isn't it? So
it's registered in Palestine. It has branches in Jordan and other Arab countries. But, the US banks that make the monthly transfer towards the Bank of Palestine have to work with intermediary banks inside Israel. The Bank of Palestine cannot receive a penny from abroad unless it comes through an intermediary Israeli bank. So these things are not clear, and UNRWA has been hammering Israel to provide clarity, and it has failed to do so until this very moment. And even Israeli journalists that tried to find that out yesterday could not get affirmative answers. So it's a mess. It's a mess.
Sounds a bit like Washington. Politicians acting on an impulse without thinking through the small print and the entanglements involved.
Absolutely. So a lot of things are therefore open and uncertain. In Gaza, in the West Bank, Israel had made a suggestion that the PA should take over the schools and the health centers, but the PA also has huge and ongoing financial crisis, doesn't have administrative capacity to take on this huge additional burden,
And is the Israeli
and is criticized by
authorities?
Israel itself, you know.
The Israeli authorities have been confiscating the tax money that should be going to the PA, haven't they? So
Exactly. So it's all also at that level. Things are not clear. So we are entering into a very messy period, exactly at a time when in Gaza aid is being stepped up as a result under the ceasefire agreement, and Israel itself is under a legal obligation now under the agreement to allow up to 600 trucks in. Now, that doesn't mean it has to allow them physically to cross the border into Gaza, but the Gaza side also has to be able to absorb these trucks, to offload them and allow them to go back to be reloaded again. Now, that capacity for a very large part is with UNRWA. So it seems that UNRWA, as long as the first phase of the ceasefire continues and does not break, will need UNRWA to keep its commitment under the ceasefire agreement. So it's a very strange sort of and uncertain and dangerous situation for the Palestinian refugees themselves that have relied on UNRWA for healthcare, for education, for social services, and for, importantly, in Gaza and increasingly also in the West Bank, for emergency support. During these very difficult periods that we have seen. Let me mention one final aspect that I think we need to monitor. I mentioned at the very beginning that UNRWA and UNHCR were created at the very same time during the same week by the UN General Assembly in December 49. UNHCR for the unresolved refugee crisis in Europe, predominantly Jewish refugee crisis, and UNRWA for the Palestinian, sort of for the secondary victims of the Holocaust. We should not sort of forget that. UNHCR then became the global refugee agency, and under the legal regime that the international community crafted at a time, there was complementarity between UNHCR and UNRWA, and also under the 1951 Refugee Convention. Those supported by UNRWA would not fall under the Refugee Convention and would not be supported by UNHCR. And that was crafted out in the statute of UNHCR and in Article 1D of the 51 Refugee Convention. But the convention also stipulated that if for whatever reason UNRWA would continue to provide support to the refugees, the convention would kick in. So the refugees would fall under the convention and would become ipso facto automatically entitled to its benefits. And also the temporary exclusion from UNHCR's mandate would come to an end. So as of today, the Palestinians in East Jerusalem are persons of concern of UNHCR and are falling under Article 1D2 of the Refugee Convention, fall fully under the Refugee Convention because UNRWA is not allowed to operate there. We don't know yet with respect to Gaza and the West Bank how things will play out. But this is also an important aspect to monitor and to pay attention to. UNHCR has been very silent, obviously also because of concerns with respect to funding and becoming embroiled in the UNRWA mess and in the animosity of Israel and by extension now the Trump administration. So UNHCR is sort of downplaying this aspect, but I believe it's important that we recognize that where UNRWA can no longer serve the Palestinians, it is the wider international refugee regime represented by UNHCR that seamlessly sort of needs to take over its responsibility.
Does this have implications, the sort of push and pull between UNHCR and UNRWA? Does that have implications about resettlement and repatriation in terms of the various
You saw a little bit of
obligations?
reference to that in Lazarini's speech for the Security Council. There was a
Lazzarini
lot.
is the head of UNRWA. We should
Yeah, is the head
remind
of
people.
the head of UNRWA. Now, UNHCR is a very different animal in comparison to UNRWA. I mentioned UNRWA is directly implementing its services, and that's why it's so big. UNHCR, by contrast, works with implementing partners. So we should not expect UNHCR to sort of simply take over UNRWA. But where UNHCR's role becomes relevant is that, contrary to UNRWA, it does have this durable solutions mandate, and if and Palestinian refugees until this moment have not had an agency with responsibility towards seeking a permanent solution for their plight. You know, they're the only group of forced migrants who sort of are left in the dark as to what will happen to them in the long term, 75 years after their original refuge. So it's really an anomaly in the UN sort of humanitarian and refugee system. So if UNHCR is becoming responsible, UNHCR has a mandate for durable solutions, which are threefold. Wherever possible, and this is underpinned by international law, return to the place where the refugees come from. If that is not possible, local integration in initial host countries, countries of asylum. And if that is also not possible, as the least best and actually most expensive solution, third country resettlement. So if UNHCR becomes involved, yes, the discourse towards solutions of Palestinian refugees with the right of return at the forefront, because return of the three durable solutions is the only one that is a right under international law. Asylum, local integration, and resettlement are subject to sovereign decisions by countries of resettlement or countries of asylum, but return is a right. And especially in the Palestinian refugee case, the right of return of Palestinians has been asserted and affirmed by the UN General Assembly as early as December 48, even before UNRWA and UNHCR were created, and has been reaffirmed and reasserted for hundreds of times. And even if that would
And as I remember, it
not
was
have, yeah, even
sorry.
if that would not have been the case, under international law, because the ethnic cleansing of Palestine constituted war crimes, involved war crimes, you know, under the law of state responsibility, they're entitled to reparations, and reparations with respect to ethnic cleansing involve return and restitution and compensation for properties that are no longer there.
As I remember, that was a principle that was accepted by Israel as part of its UN membership package as well. Is that right?
It sort of, yeah, nominally accepted the then existing resolutions, including 194. That's correct. But of course, it later became it's this became heart of the unresolved question of Palestine. You know, the return issue.
Yes, it was Abba Eban, I think, who made the speech. to He was very concerned, and those
So let
early pioneers in Israel were very sort of eager for international acceptance and membership of the United Nations, and did everything they could to make sure that Israel was part of the full committee. It is not the case anymore, though, is it?
Yes, you're right. I mean, the dynamics have significantly changed over the year.
So
And
what practical measures could Guterres, if he were to grow a spine, sorry, Guterres, if he decided to get feisty about it, what practical measures could he take with or without the other members? You know, if
Well, I already alluded to the opportunity to have avoided losing very precious UN premises by declaring, by rehatting them, by changing their purpose and turning them into common premises. That's one. Uh, 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 there is now also the need of the UN humanitarian system to come together, and this is another reason why I believe an involvement of UNHCR could have a positive effect, because UNHCR is the typical agency that works to coordinate protracted refugee crisis around the world and large-scale refugee crisis around the world, doing coordinating role, involving different actors. And as the response that has been in place for the Palestinian refugee question for the last 75 years has been, disrupted by the Israeli ban, it's time to go back to the drawing board and come up with a renewed response. And that's something that Guterres, as former High Commissioner for Refugees, knows very well and could direct, could steer, could facilitate. So as much as the principal point of sort of continuing to fight the ban is valid, you also need to make sure that the refugees are not thrown under the bus by making a principal point. There is the humanitarian imperative to always make sure that refugees first in dealing with a crisis. So these are practical points that the Secretary General can take. He can also make sure that UNRWA is further protected, and the protection of UNRWA, under the ban is by mobilizing donor support. Donors are now sitting on the fence and they're sort of looking at what is going to happen. Can UNRWA continue to function? Should we continue to give the money to UNRWA, or should we rather give it to those who will sort of replace it for certain functions? So, UNRWA is broader than just Gaza and the West Bank. It has operations in Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon, which are equally critical. UNRWA also is the custodian of the historic records of the Palestinian refugees, and it has done played a commendable role in safeguarding those. It has, even during the war in Gaza, got documents out that had not previously been scanned and electronically preserved, documents going back to the refugeehood of the first generation refugees.
These are the property claims from the losses of the Nakba, aren't they?
Property claims and the evidence of sort of refugee status, that even the documents of UNRWA's predecessors, the Quakers in Gaza and the ICRC and the League of Red Cross and Red Crescent societies in the other field offices. So these documents have been preserved. Everything is being scanned. Everything is in clouds, in different parts of the world, very safe. All the audiovisual materials, the organizational archives, they're all concentrated and out of reach of malicious actors that could sort of try to destroy them. And that function cannot be taken over by anybody. And UNRWA has also made provision that refugees can, in Gaza and the West Bank, even if UNRWA is physically no longer able to operate there, that people can update their registration records, can, through a simple phone app, they can upload their birth certificate, marriage certificate, death certificates, etc., to UNRWA in Amman and in other locations to have those. And these are the backbone of the identity, of the historic rights and claims of the Palestinian refugees. So it's very important that UNRWA, that we don't give up on UNRWA in the face of this Israeli attempt Also realizing that the real reason why Israel has done this is to sort of get the Palestinian refugee issue off the table once and for all, to erase the Palestinian refugee situation, like in Gaza with the ongoing genocide. Israel has, erased Palestinian institutions, from the universities to the schools to the hospitals, to the archives, to the administrative buildings, to the sewage treatment plants. So UNRWA is the representative of the international community for its continuing responsibility towards the unresolved question of Palestine. By trying to erase the organization, Israel is trying to get the issue off the table. So these are important things for the international community and for the Secretary General and for the General Assembly and for the Security Council to continue to engage on and not give up the agency.
So, do any of our members out there have specific questions that we haven't covered in our dialogue so far? Please hurry, because we're drawing towards the end of the session, and now is your chance. It's an issue on which almost everything's been said, but there are whole new angles, because the perversity and imagination of the Israeli settler community knows no end. And one of the things that intrigues me is the possibility of litigation from the UN and others to seize Israeli assets abroad to compensate for the hundreds of millions that are about to be confiscated.
Well, one of the it is clear. I was for a long time maybe also a bit naive or doom thinking. I was thinking that Israel would have immediately taken over, bulldozed the premises as of this morning or even overnight, which they have not done. So they realize they're not, this UN Convention on the privileges and immunities from the organization of the wider UN is a very powerful instrument, and to just go in without taking that into consideration would have been a flagrant violation that I think Israel was shying away from until now. So if there are going to be proceedings for eviction, the UN can claim compensation. As I mentioned, this compound, the land alone is worth about 200 million US dollars, let alone the premises that are on the land. So I think that is what is going to where an opportunity comes up for the UN to seek a measure of compensation.
A measure of compensation. That's
Well, we don't know yet. Let's see what.
Okay, well, Chris,
what is the
Kristen,
political resolve and what are the legal opportunities?
so a question comes in from Kristen Salumi. How should UN UNRWA engage with the Trump admin? Does he see any openings? Is engagement possible, feasible, desirable?
Well, desirable it is always. During the first Trump administration, UNRWA maintained contact with the State Department. UNRWA has an office in DC. I'm convinced even today the office in DC is trying to, at whatever level of opportunity that exists, is trying to maintain contact.
They
We
probably
don't
don't know who
know.
to contact at the moment, though, do they? With this
Well, I think
kaleidoscope in DC.
that's UNRWA is not alone in that. That goes for other international organizations as well. So let's wait until the dust on that one settles a bit. What we also don't know is how Trump is sort of quite erratic, and one of the big things Trump wants is to move forward with his the route to his Nobel Prize by working towards Abraham 2, and that involves bringing Saudi Arabia and Israel to the negotiation table. And under the current the current situation with everything that's been going on in Gaza, and more widely Trump calling for cleaning out Gaza and moving people to Egypt and to Jordan and possibly to Indonesia and who knows, to Greenland. We don't know what is further in stock. It's very difficult under those circumstances for MBS, for the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia, to engage with Trump on serious normalization. And so it may well be that at some point Trump realizes that UNRWA may not be such a bad deal after all, in sort of trying to contain the situation and make the situation a bit more palatable to the Saudis. So let's wait and see what the coming weeks and months will bring in that sense. I don't think it's a completely done deal. And UNRWA was first. It was an instrument created by the Americans originally as an instrument to try as an alternative to return. I recalled the resolution of the General Assembly affirming the right of return, and that was the principal direction that the General Assembly set for solving the refugee issue. And when that did not quickly happen, and Israel was adamant not to allow return, it was actually the Americans that encouraged setting up UNRWA, that engineered setting up UNRWA to integrate the refugees in the host countries, in the host economies, and to socially integrate them, economically integrate them. And UNRWA was modeled on the Tennessee Valley Authority, and the first cohorts of UNRWA directors and senior staff were all secondees from the TVA. And UNRWA became, for decades throughout the Gulf War, the very fact that refugees in Jordan are both citizens and refugees was at the behest of the US government, who were afraid that they would fall into the hands of the communists in Syria and elsewhere in Iraq. And so, we have refugee citizens in Jordan. So for many, many, many years, UNRWA was an instrument of US foreign policy, and that changed dramatically since the turn of the century, with the share of budget shrinking, and with UNRWA, with the US no longer demanding the #1 job in UNRWA as an American. The first 6 or 7 commissioner generals were all Americans. So who knows? With Trump being who he is, maybe there is a revival. It's too early to say.
So there is nothing new under the sun. Lack of foresight from Washington is not a recent aberration, considering the implications. Well, I think we're coming towards the end now. This is the Foreign Press Association, and we've been talking to Lex Takkenberg, an experienced operative. It makes him sound like a CIA agent, an experienced operative with UNRWA and the United Nations, on the implications both locally and internationally of the Israeli seizure of international property in Jerusalem and its failure to deal with the problems in Gaza. So, of course, we'll be following this closely over the next few months. We hope it doesn't last. Well, it is only a few months, inshallah. We don't want it to last years again. Thanks very much. Lex has been calling in from Vienna, by the way. So I don't think I mentioned that. And we're speaking from New York. We are the New York Foreign Press Association, after all. We have new and forthcoming events coming up. We are arranging with Craig Unger from the Washington Post about his book about the October surprise, another triumph of American diplomacy and electoral manipulation. And we have several others, including a panel coming up on the threat to foreign journalists' visas in the United States. because it has come to our attention that the current administration is not particularly friendly to either the media or foreigners. So we're expecting visits soon. It's not going to be as bad as fish food factories in New Jersey, but it'll be something similar. News agencies can expect a knock on the door. We shall be taking it. We invite your participation to head off this in the near future. Please join the Foreign Press Association, send money, send suggestions, and lend us a hand in publicizing what's happening in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thanks, Lex. We'll speak soon.